Shortness of breath was one of the most debilitating symptoms that I had to live with every single day for over 7 years. I had to take a breath in between each sentence that I spoke, and it hugely impaired my ability to talk and interact with other people. However, after 7 years, I finally found a long-term solution that I'm going to share with you in this video. So one of the most popular solutions that I've come across time and time again online is to perform certain breathing exercises that involve breath holding. There's an element to this in Wim Hof, the oxygen advantage, and the Buteyko breathing method. And the main premise of doing this is to allow higher levels of circulating carbon dioxide to occur so that we can gradually improve our tolerance to higher amounts of carbon dioxide. And the reason why this is so important is because oxygen molecules actually bind to carbon dioxide. And so if we have more carbon dioxide circulating the bloodstream, it will oxygenate our body better. And I actually agree with this perspective to a very large extent, that the majority of incidences of shortness of breath are primarily due to imbalances in this gaseous exchange. And it forces the individual to take in more breaths more frequently in attempt to take on board more oxygen. However, I, like many of you out there, experimented with all of these breathing techniques, and they offered me very little benefit in the way of long-term symptomatic alleviation from my chronic shortness of breath. And I eventually came to realise that the reason for that was because all of these methods addressed our voluntary breathing, but they all completely ignored involuntary respiration. Okay, so what am I talking about here? Well, for a fraction of every single day, we're consciously aware of our breathing and we're able to manipulate it to a certain extent. However, for the overwhelming majority of every single day, I'm talking about over 99% of every day, our respiration is unconscious and automatic. This unconscious breathing rhythm is set in part of our brain called the brainstem, and it has the potential of speeding up or slowing down based on numerous different variables. So this might include us changing body position, us exercising, us talking, us getting anxious before a certain event, or us responding in a particular way to changes in our environment. The body's ability to augment this rhythm in order to accommodate these variables is really a good sign, and it shows that our body is efficiently able to adapt to these changes in order to keep us, the host, in a state of balance or homeostasis. But, and this is the big but, if something has happened to you that has disrupted the function of certain neural networks existing in your brain or nervous system that tightly regulate this unconscious respiratory pattern, then there's a potential for its speed to be altered permanently. And all of a sudden a switch flicks, and without you even being aware of it, you start to blow off excess amounts of carbon dioxide on an ongoing basis. And when your involuntary respiratory centres cause this to happen, what ends up coming about as a result is that it hijacks some degree of control over your conscious being, and thus your voluntary respiration. And this will come in the form of you breathing more rapidly in attempt to try to saturate your body with higher amounts of oxygen from the environment. However, the caveat of doing this is that you'll be losing more carbon dioxide every time you breathe out. And of course, carbon dioxide is the vehicle that allows oxygen to be utilised by the body. And this is the exact reason as to why so many cases of shortness of breath and air hunger can't be resolved with breathing techniques alone. It's because despite however many breath holds you try to do, no amount of tolerance to carbon dioxide can be built up, whilst these unconscious respiratory centres are constantly signalling for us to speed up our conscious breathing. If you stick with these breathing techniques for long enough, what you'll eventually come to realise is that your body just continues to reset itself, and the chronic shortness of breath just never goes away. But if you did want to resolve this issue at its very root cause, then I highly recommend checking out my online course, The Unbeatable Blueprint. This is where we do a deep dive into some of these neural structures and pathways that help to stabilise the activity of the brainstem so that our unconscious respiratory rate normalises, which in turn will allow us to breathe far more freely. But in order to truly get to the bottom of resolving this issue once and for all, what we really need to do is we need to understand what it is that has caused this unconscious and involuntary breathing rate to speed up, and then we need to address that thing directly. What you may or may not be aware of is that in fit and healthy humans who are able to function well, certain centres within the brain, namely the cortex, which are these two large hemispheres at the top of our brain, and our vestibular system, which is located in our inner ear, actually project inhibitory neurotransmitters that help to calm down other areas of the brain. They suppress or keep the activity of our brainstem in check, which slows down our respiration and allows our body to remain in more of a parasympathetic state whilst at rest. And this is the ideal scenario, and the scenario that our body intended for us with our evolution over thousands of years. However, this scenario unfolding is entirely contingent upon these particular areas of the brain receiving continuously accurate and adequate sensory information from our external environment. You see, what happens is that we have these things called muscle spindles or mechanoreceptors that are located within the sensory division of our peripheral nervous system, and these muscle spindles help us to detect touch, pressure, pain, temperature, movement, position and vibration. And what happens is they sense this information from our environment, and then they're able to convert that signal into an electrical or a neuronal signal to then be sent up to the brain. If these muscle spindles are fine-tuned, meaning that they're functioning well and the information that they're taking on board from the environment is accurate and actually aligns with how reality is, then what that will cause is that will cause sufficient amounts of firing up to our brain, and then these certain centres of the brain will be able to produce sufficient amounts of inhibitory neurotransmitters to calm down the activity of the brainstem and thus slowing down our respiration. If, however, dysfunctions have appeared in components of our sensory nervous system, causing mismatched sensory information to be continuously sent up to our brain, then this will end up in a situation where the brain will release its hypothetical brakes on the hyperactive brainstem, which will consequently increase our unconscious respiration. I really hope you can understand the significance of what I'm saying. If something has happened that has impacted the function of these neural receptors or pathways, either due to perhaps an infection, a substance ingested, a traumatic event, a concussion, then no amount of breathing exercises on the planet will be able to resolve the issue of shortness of breath. And the reason for that is because these unconscious respiratory centres in the brainstem will just continue to reset to an undesirable state. So how I was able to significantly improve my own shortness of breath that had stuck with me for over 7 years was to identify any hypotonic or low functioning systems that existed within my brain or nervous system, and then trained these systems back up to levels that they should have originally been functioning at. This was via something called functional neurological rehabilitation, and it's something where I documented the whole experience of me going through this process on a separate video here on YouTube, so I highly recommend checking that out. Combine the key message behind this video with the information from that video, and you'll start to understand the utmost importance of having a thorough in-person physical and neurological examination in order to identify the hidden dysfunction that's responsible for the continual manifestation of your shortness of breath. Once you work towards performing the necessary targeted neurological exercises in order to strengthen the weak connections within this system, what you'll end up finding out is that the shortness of breath that you experience gradually begins to fade away as a natural byproduct, and you won't even have to think about partaking in any breathing exercises anymore, unless of course that is if you really want to.